message when I speak to anybody about recovery is to talk to your children. Nobody talked to me. We had to leave Phoenix in a fury. There was a drug dealer who was trying to kill my family.
In the medical field, they try to describe addiction as a disease. It's a choice. The bottom line is it's up to the individual whether they want to put whatever it is in their system or not.
It's not a disease, it's a will. The word addict comes from a Roman word that means slave, because it wouldn't it be interesting if we stood up instead of saying I'm an addict, we said I'm a slave. Instead of saying they're addicted, we said they're enslaved. That's a more accurate picture of what it is.
She willingly laid herself out there and said, if I have to temporarily place my children in foster care, I will do that. Every time, it gives me chills to think that this woman was willing to go that far to commit to her recovery. So I have such admiration. She sent back to me her keychain 1 year sobriety celebration. That's what we do at West Branch. We open a door. We have so many people who are celebrating beautiful lives of recovery that folks never hear about.
Person in long-term recovery myself. For me, that means I haven't used a mind or mood-altering drug since March of 2018. Now, I grew up out west. I did. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, not small at all, and I was introduced to the effects and the chaos that addiction brings to a child's life, because my mom was an alcoholic all growing up, and my uncle was a alcoholic heroin addict, and he was in and out of our life a lot. The things that I remember growing up is my mom never being there. She would disappear for days on end, and I like to tell people that my brother was older, and you know how you always have the kid in the family that somebody adopts, they go to live with the friends and stuff. Everybody loved my brother, me not so much, probably because I'm very loud. But I was left home alone at age 4, 5, 6 for weeks on end. And that's appalling to think about today. But I survived and I'm here. But the message is that there was chaos in my life, and my mom was constantly trying to chase her addiction. She had an extremely traumatic childhood. Addiction does run in our family, all the way back dated to every single person that exists. So I'm hoping that where I stand today, that I can be a cycle breaker. And my main message when I speak to anybody about recovery is to talk to your children. Nobody talked to me. We had to leave Phoenix on a bus in a fury. There was a drug dealer who was trying to kill my family. So the three of us got on a bus, we came out here. So I pledged growing up that I would never drink alcohol or do drugs. How did I introduce myself? Said I'm in recovery. I did. I spent my high school years not going to the parties where there was drugs. I did go to the parties where there was alcohol, but I was always the designated driver. I was always driving home my friends that had drank too much and that type of thing. The problem is my mom was still an alcoholic, and this is a small town, so nobody's parents liked me. They didn't realize I was making sure that their kids were home safe, but nobody liked me. So that's kind of how I grew up, and that was but I made it my goal not to be my mom. That's what I used to say all the time. I'm not going to be her. Fast forward to when I was, I was a late bloomer. There was a lot of things that I resonated with her saying. I had a child and I picked him up wrong. He was out of the bathtub and very slippery, and I went to overcorrect and I hurt my back. So I'm 35 years old, never touched an opiate in my life. Had 2 C-sections, didn't even take opiates in the hospital because I didn't like how they made me feel. So I'm prescribed opiates for the first time in my life. I'm in a bad marriage. The part of being in recovery is taking responsibility for your own addiction. I was in a bad marriage. It was horrible. But that's not the reason I used. I used because I was miserable. So I was prescribed this drug. I had a friend at the time that was also prescribed a pain medication much stronger than the one that I was taking. And told you guys I didn't drink. I didn't do all these things. Like I might have did a couple party drugs in my early 20s, but that was literally the extent of it. So I was given these pain meds. I would go over to the girlfriend's house and we would share our pain meds, you know, and I realized that opiates did something to me that life has never been able to do. It erased all my pain. And I'm not talking about physical pain. They say in the recovery world that that's the perfect storm. So you find yourself in a situation where you're given something, and I started to self-medicate. I stayed in the marriage. My husband liked what I was doing because of the fact that I was home, I was happy, I was content, I was taking care of the kids. I actually am clinically ADHD. It gave me, the pain meds gave me energy to do the housework. So that's how it started. But it got too expensive. And somebody in town, small town, knows that I'm doing what I'm doing and offers me heroin for the first time. Also, a thing she said that I thought was really funny is that a lot of addicts aren't born with that fear. I tell most people that have met me that I wasn't born with that normal amount of fear that keeps you safe. So the very first time I was given it, did it, you know? And it didn't take long for me to become addicted. And I was supported by my husband in this. But here's where the education. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't even know there was physical addiction to a drug called heroin. When I thought of heroin, I thought of, you know, the dirty person sleeping under the bridge that didn't have anything to eat, was unemployed. I didn't think of the soccer mom. Like, I didn't think that that was me. And I thought that my willpower I was gonna keep it all under control. So I ended up in the legal system, ended up on drug court in Clinton County. I like to mention that. A lot of people frown upon the legal system involvement, but I can tell you that I'm probably alive today because of it. I appreciate it. I failed out of that program. I would just let you know that. I was kicked out of the program, but it afforded me a foundation of recovery. I do a 12-step program. I'm not going to drag you through what all happened, but I can tell you that somebody in active addiction is not the person that they are without the drug in them. So you can say, how dare she leave her children home alone at 3 a.m. to go cop drugs and come back 2 hours later? What a horrible person. She should be locked up forever. I would never in my life do that without a drug in my system, because that drive for the drug takes over everything. Until I experienced addiction myself, that's when I was able to forgive my mom for what she did. Because I never understood, why wasn't I important enough? Why wasn't I enough to keep her home? Because it was just a chemical thing in her brain. It didn't allow her to choose me. It didn't allow me to choose my children. I love my children more than anything in the world. We know the love for our children. It's beyond anything. And I want to back up a little bit, that's kind of where my addiction started. I said the perfect storm. I had left the relationship that I was in. My kids were gone for the first time. You know, we did the shared thing. And I couldn't handle the pain of them being gone. And that's when the drug was introduced to me, literally at the same time. So it took away that pain. So it took a lot of struggling. I was in and out of jail. I was in and out of the legal system, constantly getting in trouble for doing things. I was 35 when I got in trouble, 34, 35. So to have somebody of a legal authority try to tell me how to live my life, you can imagine that didn't go very well. I was combative. I was manipulative, which a lot of people in addiction are. You know, we know what to say, especially if we have an enabler in our life. My mom had then quit drinking, but she was my enabler. If I was sick, she was running me to Williamsport. I can't even imagine being a mom having to do those things. So I said about the cycle breaker, and I tell my kids everything. And some of you might be appalled at the things that I've told my kids. They know everything. I worked and I still am a certified recovery specialist. I don't hold a position as of currently right now, but I did for the last 3.5 years. That's what I did. Every time we lost a patient, I told them. Every time a child was left alone, I told them. Every time a spouse or a mother or a father lost their child, I told them. I told them what drugs look like. I told them how they can become addicted. I told them that if they go smoke pot with their friends when they're teenagers, that it could be laced with something that's going to kill them. You know, anytime a statement is released out into the public that something new is going around, I show them. I'm lucky. My kids that I know of, but my kids have not touched anything. I have a 17-year-old, 13-year-old, and a 9-year-old. Education is what I lacked. Now, I'm not saying that I wouldn't have went through what I went through because I think that I was supposed to go through what I went through so I could help others. I still do for myself, even though I don't work in the field as of right now, I still participate as much as I can. The main thing for the person trying to seek recovery is to be around like-minded individuals, is to have a support group. I do 12-step. You can find it in a church. You can find it in a support group. You can find it in a family member that has went through the same thing. You need to be able to see that you can make it through to the other side. This time, and I say this time because, as I said, I was in and out. I would get clean, I would celebrate a year, I'd relapse. I'd get clean, I'd celebrate another year, I'd relapse. Celebrate 9 months. It was a cycle. And what was missing is I never did the internal work I needed to do in order to fix what was broken inside me. Me and 3 other of my friends could have went to a college party. We all go in, we're all at the same party, we're all offered the same drug. I take it, they all take it. I'm addicted for life. They're fine, and they don't understand what's wrong with me, that I once experienced this. That's because it lit up something in my brain that it did not theirs. It's hard. As I said, I have 3 children. I live in a small town. Pretty much everybody knows. Everybody knows. There's a lot of people that know me, and I don't even know who they are. But they've already formed an opinion about me. I was the heroin addict mother that had children. Oh my gosh. But what they don't realize that hopefully my kids don't end up with what I had to go through. So everybody can know, you know, the only part that hurts me is when it hurts them. Because as I told you early on, people didn't like me because of my mother. Now, my oldest he doesn't have to suffer through that because a lot of the people that I went to school with that know me personally have been around. They know who I am as a person. But my 2 younger children, those parents don't know me. So they have come into stigma. They've come into judgment. You know, there's people that don't want their kids around my kid. When they don't realize that, like, I'm actually going to be the house that there's no alcohol at. You're not going to get away with smoking pot in my bathroom because I'm not going to allow that to happen. I won't get started on the MAT drugs. Just speaking of marijuana, it's not something that's going to happen in my house. But I know a lot of parents that they're okay with as long as it's in my house. That's not who I am. So, but all my friends know it. And listen, my oldest is 17. His friends come in, and you know, if I like cook my dinner or something like that, they joke with me. They're like, "Oh, is that like what you had in jail?" And I'll be like, "Yeah, you know," because I don't lie to them either, because hopefully I can save them as well. I put my stuff out there, and a lot of people don't understand how I can speak so freely and so candidly. When I'm speaking at a recovery event, I get real down and dirty. I let you know exactly what I did, because you probably did something worse, or I did something worse, and you need to know that I'm still standing up here and I'm still alive. Because we spoke about the fact that, you know, heroin was a big thing, and it was, and fentanyl. And the entire time I worked at the MAT clinic that I worked at, I did not see one positive for heroin, actually. It was all fentanyl. And in the recovery community, you can meet a heroin addict that's been alive for 18 years. You know, they used for 15 of them. You're not going to meet a fentanyl addict that's been alive for 15 years, been using that long. They're not going to make it. It's not going to happen. So education is important. The fact that I didn't know is because we didn't talk about it. And there's still people that don't talk about it because they think if they don't talk about it, it won't happen. But that's not how it works. It's still going to happen. Your kids are still going to hear it. Your, even your older people that don't know. There's going to be people like me that are so oblivious that they're going to take that first pain med at 40, and they're not going to realize they're going to become addicted until the doctor's like, oh, insurance purposes, we can't give that to you. Because I can tell you what, that happens. They cold turkey people. And then what else do they have to do but to find a way not to be sick? Looking for the symptoms or the characteristics of an addict, I guess that's helpful. But any last person can become addicted. Before I picked up a drug, I was addicted to about everything. But it was socially acceptable, so it was never a red flag. I was addicted to money. I was addicted to sex, but I was married, so, that was acceptable. I was addicted to shopping. That was a huge thing for me. You name it, I can become addicted to it. I'm addicted to, social media today. It is what it is. At least I'm not going to, die from that. Which is a good thing. You never know. Poor judgment skills, I'm not sure. But the main message that I always like to give is what I said multiple times. Educate your children. Educate anybody that you know. And offer support. Not enabling, but support. I am that person that I see new people come into the rooms of recovery in and out all the time. And I'm the person that if it's the 20th time you come in, you can still reach out to me. You can still come to me. You can still use my number, because I've seen people get clean or sober, however you want to say it, that 20th time and sustain 5 years. I've seen people that has had a substantial amount of clean time, relapse, and then turn around and get another substantial amount of clean time. But it's hard. It's hard to come back into recovery after you've relapsed. It's almost like you have to put your tail between your legs and ask for help. This is the way it is. You either ask for help or you die. That's where I'm at with it. So I'm glad Grace asked me to be here. That's pretty much all I have.
Interestingly enough, part of the conversation that Deb and I just had between sessions here, so to speak, was longevity in the field. And I will tell you that I have now been blessed to be with West Branch Drug and Alcohol Abuse Commission for 24 years. I was in direct care outpatient providing counseling for substance use disorders for 3 years prior to that. Sadly, that satellite office closed at that time. I had some brief transition in between and then found my home. One of the many things that I love about West Branch is it's constantly full of opportunities. We are responsible for the oversight and provision of some of the services for substance use disorders across the continuum for Clinton and Lycoming counties. So some of that is starting from the prevention perspective. We provide Too Good for Drugs curriculum, which is an evidence-based program for a number of the students in the elementary and middle schools, working toward something in the high schools in addition as well. That, and I'm one of the things that I love about what Deb had to say was that communication piece. So in addition to education, I think where you didn't give yourself enough credit is relation. We can feed people all kinds of information, but if it doesn't hold value for them, it goes nowhere. So establishing that relationship, that communication with your kids is where they're hearing you. They know that you care. They know that they have value. They know that they can set and achieve goals. They know that they can be somebody. All of those things are critical to our kids. If they have those, they are much more receptive to the education that you're providing. And that's why your kids are hearing you. That's why your kids' friends are hearing you. So Too Good for Drugs curriculum is exactly what it says. It's teaching these kids that they are too good for what drugs can do to their lives. It does teach them about the different substances and how they can impact them, but it also teaches them some of those life skills. Refusal skills, yes, but also how to set and achieve goals. If you don't have that sense of direction and belief in yourself, you don't feel the sense of value that you deserve. Okay? So we use those tools to build and instill those things to help those kids use the refusal skills, knowing that these substances can do some very bad things in their life. Intervention, you can look at that from two different perspectives. One piece of the intervention that is our primary focus is actually intervening before it becomes a bigger problem. If we have a student who's begun to experiment and they're recognizing at school that they're not succeeding, and we have a suspicion that this is part of the reason, if not the reason, that they're struggling. And so we serve as an ad hoc liaison to teams in the schools that will help to identify those students, reach out and seek parent permission to meet with them, sit down, do an evaluation, and offer them whatever kind of support we feel would be most beneficial to them. And hopefully that will interrupt the beginning of a cycle. The other concept of intervention, a lot of folks look at it in terms of the A&E intervention program, and that certainly happens. There are traditional intervention programs out there or opportunities, and we can connect you with those. We also provide what is known as the Arise Continuing Care and Intervention model. That is very family focused. It's an invitational model. So whereas there may be a greater level of defensiveness when the family gathers without the individual, creates a plan, and then brings them into the process, the individual in this model is a part of that process from the beginning. And so therefore doesn't have the opportunity to feel like, well, you've been talking behind my back, you've all decided what you want to do, and you're going to come tell me how that's going to work. This model is designed differently. And it is an ongoing process, as opposed to the traditional intervention is, planning process, meet, hopefully they'll go to treatment, and we no longer meet. The beauty of that, regardless, is that it can be a healing experience even if that individual doesn't seek treatment, because at least you can make peace with yourself that you've made that effort. It is also of greater benefit to hear it from everyone at once rather than allowing that give and take in an independent individual one-on-one battle to occur. One-on-one, the disease is going to win every time. Okay? So if you can bring those concerned individuals together to have that conversation out of love and care and concern with some expectations, you're much greater chance of success. So the Arise model requires a minimum of 6-month commitment from the network, and asking that we look at family patterns, look at the trauma that you've experienced, look at what you have done to get where you are, the amazing strengths that you've built generation upon generation through the family, and looking at, oh my goodness, no wonder these things are a part of your lives today. Look at what you've come from, okay? So it's an intergenerational exploration and journey, but it helps to eliminate the secrecy, shame, blame, and guilt, and just let's have an open conversation. And ideally, then that family will continue to meet after that 6 or more month period of time and continue to have those conversations and process and communicate. Okay? And then we move into where the greatest number of our staff reside, so to speak, and that's in our case management program. That is designed to screen, assess, refer, get people connected with the treatment services that they need. Beyond that, to help cover the cost of those expenses if needed, and also to look at all of the other barriers that stand in the way, because recovery from the substance use disorder in and of itself is hard enough. If you are asked to go to multiple counseling appointments and all of these other, I want you to do 90 meetings in 90 days and blah, 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 blah. Well, that sounds lovely. Who's watching my children? How am I supposed to get there? This medical problem that I'm facing or this mental health issue that I'm dealing with, they're putting me down. It's hard for me to get out of the house. And you want me how many different places? Well, I also have to go meet with my probation officer, and we work to help make that piece more manageable. So I look at it in terms of the treatment piece is to, in the 12-step programs, they talk about a manageability. There are some things that we can make more manageable. Case management is designed to help you make life more manageable. Some things simply aren't. And so we all need healthy ways of coping and dealing with those unmanageable parts of our lives and creating some more internal manageability. What can I do, change with me and within to make my life better and move forward? So that's more the treatment end of things. So we're contracted with programs everywhere from, your routine outpatient services. Actually, even prior to that, there's kind of that early intervention, more educationally based component through intensive outpatient, partial hospitalization, halfway houses, rehabilitation programs, detox or withdrawal management is the terminology that we're using today. One of the opportunities out there that I think is among our most beautiful is we have some long-term women with children programs out there. One of my favorite success stories, and I have a number, I'm really pleased and honored to be able to say, was a woman who came to us not because she had any involvement in the criminal justice system or anything. It was time. It was simply time. And she was willing to go to a 6-month program where she gets to take her kids with her. Okay? So you can take, depending upon the program, up to 2 or 3 of your children under the age of 12 along with you. So the beauty of that is that your children get to recover alongside you. The beauty of that is that there's a lot of wreckage in that relationship, and so they get to be able to repair that together. They grow on that journey together. And while it's always helpful to have tools, being able to implement those tools in an environment that is supported and encouraged is much greater in its likelihood to succeed as well. So I can give you all this parenting information and encouragement and what have you. You take that home and your kids are struggling. And chances are they're angry. And you have got enough challenge in your life to deal with without trying to navigate. I mean, adolescence is hard, period. Okay? In a healthy family, in a functional family. Imagine that and trying to come home and parent in the midst of it and overcome all of the damage that's been done by this disease. Right? So this gives an opportunity for that relationship to be built, to connect people with the resources in the community for their children too. So any developmental issues they may be trying to overcome, therapeutic needs they may have, all of those things all at the same time. So this woman was all in. She was willing to commit. There was one obstacle in her way that was a pretty big hurdle, and that was that she was going to have to go through withdrawal management first. You can't take your kids to a withdrawal management program. You're going to be in a detox facility and try to, it doesn't exist. She willingly laid herself out there and said, if I have to temporarily place my children in foster care, I will do that. And I still, just on a side conversation, talked about the chills earlier. Every time, it gives me chills to think that this woman was willing to go that far to commit to her recovery. While I, as an adoptive parent, having been a foster family, can recognize, and as a professional in this field, can recognize children and youth's desire is not to go in and snatch children from their families, but the humility and the willingness to put your children in someone else's care and trust that you will get them back, knowing the kind of chaos that your life has brought at that point in time, is beyond my ken. So I have such admiration. She went to the program. She did have some difficulty and actually had to have a psychiatric placement in the interim, but she went back, she completed. She stayed in that continuum, moved on through some of the community-based resources that they had. They have beautiful opportunities to, there's a housing element while you do this program and so on. So they step you down very gradually. And I wasn't hearing about that. Once she completed that program, she's in another county. She's no longer being paid by our services. We're technically not providing her case management, what have you. However, a year and shortly, whatever short time frame thereafter, my director went to that facility. And this woman caught wind of the fact that someone from West Branch was going to be there because she was still tied in. She sent back to me her keychain 1-year sobriety celebration in thanks to me. And you know what I have to say to that? All I did was open a door. I did. I made that connection for her to temporarily place her children in foster care from the moment that she completed that withdrawal management program and transferred to the long-term Women with Children's program. Kids joined her. And a year later, she's thanking me. I opened a door. That's what we do at West Branch. We open a door. Because I love my success stories. Some years ago, we offered an airing of the Anonymous People film, okay? And that speaks to long-term recovery and kind of breaking out of the shell to help break that stigma. We have so many people who are celebrating beautiful lives of recovery that folks never hear about. They know the under the bridge story, right? The stigma prevents people from stepping out and saying, yes, I have this battle, I had this battle, I still on a day-to-day basis fight this battle, but look who I am today. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, whomever. So, a young woman who got into nursing had first connected with me when she was 16 years old. She was moving into a different community, rough and tough, gotta assert myself and getting in fights, and, I'm a city girl and moving to the Lock Haven area. But she also was a creative writer. She was a caretaker for her younger sister when her mom really wasn't equipped to do that at the time. We had to overcome an issue where I had to make a child line report. I had to report that, if it weren't for this 16-year-old, her sister wouldn't be functioning as well as she is. It's hard for her to swallow. Worked through it. Down the line, she's a grown woman, young woman, pregnant, still struggling, ends up going to a halfway house, having her child, and so on. So a number of years later, as I said, in the field of nursing, very, very active, giving back to her community, loving wife and mother, okay. The end of this film, she came up behind me and gave me this hug in tears and thanked me. And again, I opened a door. What I did for her was simply what has been given to me, and that I was simply able to see who she is today. Then it was who she was. The drug was not who she was. She's a force to be reckoned with, and has many years in long-term recovery today. So again, that's what West Branch does. We open doors. We try to help smooth the path because it is so incredibly difficult. The other piece to what I should probably speak to is the Advocates for a Drug-Free Tomorrow, community coalition that brings together different sectors of the community. It has membership from county commissioners and judges and district attorney's office and service providers and faith-based community and folks in long-term recovery and loved ones, family members of folks in long-term recovery. So we try to get the message to the people. We try to instill opportunities. One of the opportunities that we've put out there right now is that we've established a wellness committee. So each year we have a rally for recovery, 5K. This year we added a 10K, and thankfully, as a result of sponsorships and registrations and what have you, we've developed a little bit of a cushion. We want to be able to use that to be able to give back to the recovering community, and that is to offer wellness opportunities for people who perhaps want to go to the gym, but they can't afford to do that. Maybe they want to get into some artistic things that will support their total well-being. There are funds for treatment. There aren't funds out there typically for those kinds of things, so we want to be able to provide that for folks that we can. A number of different perspectives and activities that we offer there. The thing that I love the most about that coalition is that broad-based representation, and that Deb can come in and have a conversation with her commissioner and say, look, this is the reality of things and this is what we need. And that commissioner can go and make some changes on a systemic level to help serve that. We are fortunate, and it has happened, and we are fortunate that we have judges in the community who understand this problem and are able to see people as people, regardless of their individual battles. It's an opportunity for people to voice their experience and so on together. So without the voice of those who are in active recovery, those who are not and are trying to make a positive change are without. If you want to build on something and meet the needs, then if you're not conversing with the people whose needs they are, you're missing the boat. Another piece of beauty is the Certified Recovery Specialist credential. Years ago, when I started in this field, we had a number of people who were employed as, whether it be counselors or case managers or what have you, that didn't have to have a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a doctorate in order to provide the service, because they had lived experience. There was a respect for that. There came a time where those requirements were instilled, and so we started to lose some of that value. Circle back around, we now have the Certified Recovery Specialist opportunity, and so that is the peer with the lived experience coming alongside somebody who's still active in the struggle at a level that it feels insurmountable, right? And that's another thing that Deb spoke to that I loved, and that is that vision of hope. I can give all the love and care I want to somebody who's trying to work their way out of an overdose, and I think one of my greatest responsibilities is to let you know that I believe in you, is not going to strike home in the same way as somebody who has been there, who has done that, who has lived the experience, and who is on the other side of it. There's nothing to replace that. And that is another one of the things that's beautiful about my job, is that we have a handful of certified recovery specialist staff at my agency as well. And that's exactly what they do. They are at the bedside in the hospitals when somebody's coming out of an overdose. They are going to the different units in the hospital. It doesn't have to come to an overdose. Whatever the reason they're there, if there is anything related in some way to a substance use disorder or even an inkling, they'll go, they'll talk, they'll make the connection, plant the seed, maybe establish a relationship or a connection, open the door. And that is one also of the most fulfilling parts of my job today now, is that I get to walk alongside these amazing people every day. I have an admiration that you can't fathom, because most people don't do the work that someone like Deb has done. Most of us do not invest in making that deep commitment and level of personal change to become the best person we can be. That's who our folks in long-term recovery are. And they need to be celebrated.
A lot of addicts don't want help. They don't want to quit. So it makes it all that more important that when we find one who does, that we do what we can to help them quit. Of all the people who have beaten addiction that I've met, which is substantial, the highest number of individuals who stayed clean the longest for good were people who were in faith-based addiction recovery programs, because it fixes the whole person. The rule is no victim language. In other words, no use of the disease model. No way. Not on my watch. It's not a disease. People don't line up to get cancer on payday, but they do line up to get meth, coke, and liquor. I was around addicts of the most extreme type. 3 of them are dead for a long time. Had intimate conversations in dressing rooms, tour buses, backstage. And I'm here to tell you, it's not a disease. It's a will. The word addict comes from a Roman word that means slave. Because it wouldn't it be interesting if we stood up, instead of saying I'm an addict, we said I'm a slave. Instead of saying they're addicted, we said they're enslaved. That's a more accurate picture of what it is. Accountability only would be taught in my ministry. And here's some motivating factors. I had a friend who went to Iraq and got back and said his alcoholism was, he tried to blame what happened in Iraq. He was a drunk before he ever signed up in the war. Another friend of mine was in Vietnam, goes to a counselor now, had to lay in a pile of dead bodies while the Viet Cong were sticking bayonets in him to make sure they were dead. His dead friends were on top of him. He was alive. They stabbed him in the leg with a bayonet, and he couldn't make any noise because he didn't want him to know he was alive. He still goes to a psychiatrist for this. He's never done one single drug or touched a drop of alcohol in his life. Never wanted to. So if you're telling me people self-medicate because of traumatic events, I'm telling you, if that were the case, everybody would be a meth head, because every human being has traumatic problems in their life. I don't buy this thing that it's the disease model. It's a disease. You have a disease. It's not a disease. I tell you what, I could, if I told you my life story, I could probably make you cry. I've had some awful things happen to me in my life. And I was the worst of the worst alcoholic. And I'm going to be really, really honest. Every time I drank, I was never, ever once thinking about the hurt in my life. I was thinking how good getting buzzed feels. It feels good to be buzzed. It feels good to do a couple lines of Coke, 4 shots of whiskey, and start pounding beers around a pool table with all my buds and music blaring in the background. That feels good. I wasn't upset. But guess what? When I would start getting drunk, then I'd start thinking about the bad things in my life. See, darkness never took me to drugs and alcohol. But drugs and alcohol always took me to darkness. Always takes you to the darkness. So when people say, well, man, I had a hard life. I did too. But is that why you drink, or do you drink? People say, well, you medicate. You don't. Come on, man. I've been around the most honest people on the planet about doing drugs. It's because it's fun and it's a good time. We know that's not the truth, but that's what we think when we're doing it. In his lecture entitled "The New Era of Positive Psychology," the former president of the American Psychological Association, he cited advances made in experimental medications used for treating alcoholism and depression, among other things, and he noted the downside of using the disease model. which is reassigning blame under the guise of, and then calling it a disease. You can't help it, and because it leads to medicating. He went on to say that the problem with this way of thinking was that psychologists and counselors are becoming victimologists and pathologizers. They're telling people that their problems are caused by others or other life events. And they realized that they needed to focus more on what he calls positive psychology. Now, this operates on 3 rules, but they're really all part of the same one rule. The number 1 rule is that psychology should be as concerned with someone's strengths as it is their weaknesses. Well, I know you're a drug addict. Talk to me about what you're good at. What did you used to do before you're a drug addict? Let's talk. Anyone who's counseled here, and I think everybody pretty much has, in some capacity, the most important part of counseling is listening. We know that, right? You got to let them talk. Sometimes use the Socratic method to get them to the answers, but we listen. Number 2, it should be just as concerned with building the good things in life as it is with repairing the worst. Now, this is strictly a reference to medications. Instead of saying, well, these medications will bring your, help get you off of stuff, we know that a lot of medications that do that end up becoming another addiction problem. So building the good things should be a heavier focus than just repairing the worst. And the third principle in this is it should also be equally concerned with nurturing people's lives and encouraging what's called high talent, what we would call gifts. Everybody's got some unique thing under themselves. Nurturing high talent, his approach to not only examining depressed, but examining happy people. If we're going to know what makes drug addicts addicts, well, let's look at what makes people who aren't addicts non-addicts. Let's look at Debra and see what incentive she had to quit, and then compare that to you, person. What incentive do you have to quit? The lady you talked about wanted to quit, put her kids in a foster home. Somebody's on fire to quit. They were on fire for this reason. One of my biggest drive was my wife. That was it. I was going to lose her for good, and that was the thing that I saw but that was my thing. What's your thing, whoever you are? What's the thing that drives you? What makes you happy? Let's look at what makes happy people happy to find out. He identified 3 types of happiness in life that make life important. And this is something you would break down if you're talking to somebody in counseling. Number 1 is the pleasant life. This is positive emotion, unsustainable. It's usually where drugs come from, but it's the little things. It's physical intimacy. It's an ice cream cone. It's a good movie. It's a long nap on a fall day. It's whatever. It's the little things. That's the first kind of happiness. We need those things, but they're unsustainable. The second type of happiness is called a life of engagement. This is the good life. This is family, relationships. Time stops, you know. You're not relying on pleasure, but you're becoming one with the music in your life. Your children, your family. You have this harmony about your life that you blend in with everyone. That's a life of engagement. And the third is the most powerful, a life of meaning. Knowing your highest strengths and using them in service of something larger than you. For me, that's God. In order to have what we defined as happiness overall for an addict, these 3 rank from 3 back to 1. The most important is a life of meaning, a life of engagement, and then the pleasant life. That's the least important, but that's the one they're trying to have rule their world, isn't it? The thing that's unsustainable. So we start by telling them this. We're going to fix you, man. But we're going to fix you by showing you all the good instead of making this a pity party and putting you on a prescription. But the short of it is this. Are we spending a disproportionate amount of time on telling people why they are addicts than we are in telling them what awaits them when they walk away from it? I tell addicts that they're a superhero waiting to happen. I do. I say, listen, man, you are going to beat this because there's a kid across town right now doing meth, and he's going to meet you in 3 years. You're going to walk into a room, and that kid is going to listen to you more than he listens to his counselor because you've been there. And you are going to pluck that kid out of the fire, and he's going to call you every week. You're a superhero waiting to happen, man. As soon as you beat this, you're not just a recovering addict. You're a lifeguard, man. You're pulling people out of shark-infested waters, man. You're a hero. You're going to be. You're going to be a hero. When I was an alcoholic, I had a routine. I wrote this down. As soon as I got off work, I had vodka in the console of my truck. My thinking was, it won't kick in until I get home, so I won't be drunk while I'm driving. I'm good. I'd get in my truck and I'd take a massive drink, massive, right out of the bottle to get this real hard bite on my tongue and in my throat. And then I would pour some into my traveling mug with my mixer, whatever it was that day. And I headed home to peacefully begin drinking myself into a coma. I noticed something very interesting when I thought back on this at the time. I realized that when I took the first big gulp and the burn was intense in my throat, I would gag, choke. I felt this great calmness come over me because I knew the buzz was on its way. And then I got to thinking more deeply about that moment. Why was a calmness suddenly coming into me when the alcohol hadn't even had time to get into my bloodstream and do the work? Why was I so content before the buzz arrived? Writing it off as some psychological effect seemed unfair. There had to be more there. Something happening that I wanted to unpack. So while I was pondering this thought, I realized that achieving a calmness that I previously thought was only attainable by the alcohol itself was possible without the alcohol. It was in that moment. It was in that micro moment without the alcohol. How could this be? And more importantly, how could I take that moment and stretch it out? How could I pick that moment out where there was no alcohol in my body and stretch it out to eliminate the need for the alcohol itself? I knew that moment, that micro moment of magic existed because I experienced it every day. Every day I took the drink, the satisfaction was there before the buzz came. Finding, identifying, and living in this moment became an obsession for me. I didn't find it at the AA meetings. That bored me. I didn't find it from a counselor. I went to a mental health team and they put 4 people on me. I told them to pound sand and left. That felt too invasive. These methods have been proven to work for a lot of other people, and they still do, but they didn't work for me. It didn't work for me. I was bathing in narcissism, lathered up in pride, and drying off with entitlement. I work hard. I take care of my family. I'm responsible. I'm a rock star, man. People around the world know my name. If I have a few drinks if I want, I can do what I want, and no one can stop me. I deserve this. Deserve what? Did my family deserve this? Did they deserve to see their leader slumped over the wheel of the ship, slobbering onto the floor as it approaches the rocky shores? Did they deserve a leader that in his downtime thought it was okay to let the enemy babysit his family? Finally, I found the moment. I began a journey that was very lengthy. I transferred my major into leadership and ministry at a Christian college, and I wasn't fooling around. I thought, God, if you're there, prove it. Show me. I'm going to give you my life. Everything I've done that I'm good at is yours now. It's not for me anymore. I'm giving it all to you. I got up and I walked out of an art college and went to a Christian college. And I was telling God to prove he was there. The funny thing is, it wasn't the college trip that saved me. It was the faith-driven, constant prayer relationship that saved me. I literally got up one day and never drank again. I know that's weird. I tried to quit a bunch. I got up one day and I just never, ever drank again. And I later found out from my doctor that could have killed me because I was drinking a lot. I was drinking about a fifth a day, a fifth of liquor a day. My wife worked later at Ohio Health, monitoring people like this, watching them on TV cameras going through withdrawal, looking at the screen, yelling, calling her name, screaming, trying to tear themselves out of beds. Technically, I should have been one of those people, but I wasn't. So I used to tell my wife, I don't want to tell people my story because they're not going to believe me. They're not going to believe that I just got up one day and never drank again. She said, you have to. You got to. That's the truth. I said, I don't want them to think I'm pandering, like it's just some kind of religious propaganda. They're going to think that because I'm a pastor. And she said, no, it's the truth, though. It did happen. You got to tell them. And so, here's the funny thing. When I say I prayed, I discovered that prayer isn't just about talking. It's about listening. I knew this. I've known this for a long time. I heard myself lie to God. And this is a great example of what addicts do. That was a life-changing moment. That was a life-changing moment. I told God, oh, God, please help me. I hate my addiction. I hate my sin. I hate it. I hate it. And I'm like, you liar, you love it. You love this stuff. And I was like, yeah, I do. Prayer time's over. I'm like, man, I want to get buzzed. I want to drink because I loved it. I just lied to God. I went to God and said, I hate this. And then I realized, wait a minute, I got to tell the entire truth. The entire truth is I love it. Can you please help me to hate it? Because that's what I need help with. That's when things started to change for me. When I was 100% honest about it, learned to hate it. Met a girl like the one you were talking about at the at one of these events, and people would switch tables every 20 minutes. And I was at a table with her, this girl next to me, and a judge, and a doctor, and a rehab counselor. And she started complaining. She said, well, I can't go to the rehab and work and do it. She wanted money. She wanted more money. She said, we don't get enough money. I started thinking about this accountability thing. You have to go into it. You have to say, you know what? I'm going to be accountable for this. When it was my turn to talk, I said, you got yourself into this. You're not immune to the consequences. Thank your lucky stars there's any program in the world that even wants to help you. Most people don't care about you. They just don't want your kids and your junkie mom while they're running the streets, robbing them at the bank machine. Some of them say they care. They don't care. They want you to go away. But the truth is, you've got this amazing life, these amazing things you can do. And you've got this small amount of people that want to help you take what they got. You're going to have to take your lumps to get better. You're going to have to take some accountability. It's a fight, but you got to get in it. You can't sit in one spot and people are going to bring you sobriety in the form of a check. It's just not going to happen. And the judge looked at me and went, like she wasn't getting enough. And the things that she said she had was more than most addicts I know get. And I told her it's not going to be easy, but I told her she was beautiful. I'm talking on the inside. And what she could do and how powerful she could become. I gave her the superhero speech. I said, you don't realize the potential you have when you beat this, how tough you're going to be, who you're going to help. Your kids aren't going to look at you and say, Mom was a junkie. Your kids are going to look at you and go, my mom beat this. My mom beat this. My mom took it by the horns and beat it. I go, let them see that example. The disease model, it helps some people, but it's pretty temporary. When you tell someone it's a disease, you can't help it. Victim language prolongs the addiction. It's because I've met people like, well, it's not my fault. Something bad happened when I was a kid. It's a disease. I self-medicate. So, not my fault. I'll take a quarter ounce of weed, and that's not true. To tell people that, we're lying to them. It's not your fault. You were a victim. I know that we have sad things in our heart, but the drugs take us to the darkness before the darkness takes us to the drugs. Victim language prolongs addiction. I see it enable people. I don't use it. I let people tell their hard stories. I'm not saying to shut people down when they're sharing pain. We should let them. But that's the truth. And the truth, I always say, has a funny way of showing up at all the parties where it wasn't invited. If we equip people to handle that truth through accountability first, we arm them to defeat the fear of sobriety by developing hunger pains for the good life that's on the horizon.
And I'm going to present it from the medical standpoint. My background is an emergency room nurse, and I also am a CPR instructor, an advanced cardiac life support instructor. Currently, I teach at Penn College in the nursing program. I've also taught paramedics in the past, and I've also had a background both in long-term care and intensive care. Addiction has been something, especially in the emergency room, that we have seen more and more and more as the years have progressed. I've been in healthcare since the 70s, and today it is just not even the same picture it used to be back in the 70s. Initially, I want to talk about the definition of addiction. It's defined as a condition in which something that started as a pleasurable experience now feels like it's something you cannot live without. This was a definition that came in some of the information I have, and I have a little issue with one of the words in it, but I will read it. It's a quote. Chronic relapsing brain disorder, and disorder is the problem I have because in the medical field, they try to describe addiction as a disease, and maybe in some part it is, but I also feel it's a choice. It may be a difficult choice, but I still feel it's a choice. The bottom line is it's up to the individual whether they want to put whatever it is in their system or not. So this says, a chronic relapsing disorder defined by a physical and psychological dependence on drugs, alcohol, or a particular behavior. A person with an addiction, they often pursue their toxic habits despite putting themselves and others in any way, in harm's way. Addictions heavily impact the individual, and it affects how they think, how they feel, how they act. They may be aware that they have a problem, but they have difficulty stopping it on their own. And I'm not going to talk so much about what's available in the community. I know there's some information over there on the table for places that you could possibly seek for help in getting rid of the addiction. There are others, though, that have stopped on their own without seeking care or help elsewhere. A lot of times it's very difficult, and there's lots of relapses. So an addiction can be it can be tempting to try a drug or an addictive activity for the very first time, but it's too easy then for things to go south. And you seek that, and you have a really great high or euphoric type of feeling. And then every additional time after that, you're always seeking that initial euphoria, but you never really hit it. So you keep ingesting or doing the behavior, whatever it is that's going to create that euphoria that you initially felt. Prolonged substance abuse can result in a lot of a cycle of dangerous addiction. It can be the individual needs to continue either taking the drugs, drinking the alcohol, or continuing the behavior, like gambling is one. For an addiction to develop, the drug or activity must shift a person's subjective experience in a desirable direction. So that means into either feeling good or at least feeling better. May not be at the point of good, and again, at that initial state of euphoria, but the addict is always trying to achieve that same result from the first time. And as far as medical standpoint and a physiological standpoint, there have been studies done that where they've done brain imaging or MRIs of the brain, and they have shown that our brains respond similarly to different pleasurable experiences. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be ingesting a psychoactive drug. It could be alcohol. It's also considered psychoactive drug if you want to put it in a category. And then either other behaviors, as I said, like gambling. Sex is another addiction people have. Shopping, that's another one that might be an issue with some people. There has also been genetic research that has revealed that some people are predisposed to addiction. That doesn't mean that they will become addictive, but they can be predisposed. Addiction is a relationship between a person and an object or an activity. With addiction, the object or activity becomes increasingly more important, while previously important activities become less important. Ultimately, addiction is about the complex struggle between acting on an impulse and resisting that impulse. When this struggle is causing suffering related to health, family, work, and other activities of everyday life, addiction might be what the situation is. I'm going to talk a little bit about addiction and how it affects the brain, because a lot of addictions, actually, the brain is the one organ in the body that's affected the most, both psychologically and physiologically, when it comes to ingesting drugs and or practicing certain activities. When a person consumes a substance such as alcohol or drugs, the brain produces large amounts of endorphins. Endorphins are a chemical / hormone / neurotransmitter that works in our brain, and their nickname has been called the happiness hormones because they give us a euphoric feeling. And it's a very pleasurable feeling. And so when you would ingest the drug, practice the behavior, and you develop that euphoric feeling, it's both a psychological effect but also a physiological effect, because it is the physiological action of release of these chemicals in the brain called endorphins. Specifically, the one that's most affected is dopamine. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that particular drug type, but that is one of the hormones that our brain releases. When the endorphins are released, it's sort of a reward to the body / a euphoric situation. It's a good feeling. And of course, nobody wants to feel badly. So just generally in life, it's a human behavior to always want to seek a better situation or feeling better than you do. As far as opioids, because that's sort of what I'm going to focus on the most, it's more of a pain relief. That's where a lot of people get addicted to opioids. It just starts very innocently because they had a surgical procedure or they had an injury, and their physician put them on opioids of some sort and sent them home on them. And then, because doctors are not going to give you prescriptions forever, an individual, once they start with the opioids for the pain control, many times they need to take more of that opioid to produce the same result. So even opioid use, even if it's short-term, it can lead to an addiction, and unfortunately, too often, to an overdose. Anybody that takes opioids, they're at risk for developing an addiction. And if you have knee surgery, doctor gives you some Percocet or something along those lines for pain control, in as few as 3 days of taking it as prescribed, you can therefore develop an addiction. It's very, very easy. And it was not really realized in the past, more so now, because, like I said, overdoses have become increasingly popular in the emergency room, and we're realizing that it is a big issue. It's not difficult for someone to innocently develop an addiction, especially the opioid addiction, because of pain control. So what these endorphins do also, when you take a pain medication, they change your perception of pain, but they also affect the pain because it affects your brain, but it also affects your nervous system throughout your body. So your perception of the pain has changed, but also the pain is lessened because it affects the nerves at the particular spot in your body where you're experiencing that pain. One thing I wanted to talk about, okay, so I mentioned that with opioids, doctor gives you a prescription, you take the dose that he gives you, and then you're finding out after 3-4 days it's not working, or it seems like it's not working. You're not getting the same kind of pain control that you initially had. What happens is the body builds a tolerance up to the drug, and when that tolerance is built up, it then takes more of the drug to give you the intended pain relief that was the initial reason for you taking the medication. A lot of times in the past, I can remember back in the 1990s working in the emergency room, there was a big push for pain relief. In fact, they called it the 5th vital sign. Vital sign initially was your temperature, your pulse, your respiratory rate, and your blood pressure. And then the 5th one was, what is your pain level? 0 to 10 scale is what we've always used. Anything above 6 or 7 is considered severe. Mild is 1 to 3, moderate's 4 to 6, somewhere in there. And I remember back in the 90s, because having worked in the emergency room, you experience drug seekers. So they may go from one physician to another physician, and then the physician stopped giving them prescriptions. So then they start going to emergency rooms. And prior to HIPAA, most cities have more than one hospital. And I worked at both Devine and Williamsport and Jersey Shore and Lock Haven in the emergency rooms over the years. And we would keep a record of people that came frequently. And I just want to explain one situation, because I was working at Devine and Williamsport at the same time. We had a girl come in complaining of abdominal pain. There is typical drug-seeking behavior. She showed it. Doctor would not give her what she asked for because she wanted opioids, because we found no reason to do that. He did the diagnostic workup on her, and there was nothing indicative of why she would be experiencing pain. So he refused. And ironically, I worked the next day at Williamsport emergency room, and she showed up there with the same complaint. And so we used to, we're not allowed to do this anymore because of HIPAA, we used to either keep index cards or Rolodex with the person's names, their aliases, the complaints they used to come in with. And when a person would come in and we suspected that they were seeking drugs and they were not there for a valid physical reason, we would call the other facilities to see if they had any history of them, especially if there was someone new coming into the emergency room. It kind of helped if you worked full-time versus part-time, because you're more apt to see the regulars that would come in. But with HIPAA, we're not allowed to do that anymore. However, I don't agree with that because HIPAA is to prevent release of your information unless it's for the continuity of care. And I define continuity of care if you're going from one emergency room to another emergency room to another emergency room, and we don't know that you've already were just given 30 Percocet at the previous emergency room, and now you're coming to our facility. How am I going to provide adequate continuity of care, which is appropriate for your situation, which really is not giving another prescription for an opioid for them to take? So there's a lot of controversy that goes on with that. It helps to have worked in all the emergency rooms because I know this, or I did. It's been a while since I worked in the emergency room, but I knew the staff in all of them, so I could call up and ask for a particular person, or usually the person that answered the phone would know me and I would know them, so then we would just ask, you know, has so-and-so been in there with such and such? Well, as I mentioned, tolerance is developed because as you continue to take the medication, it tends to have less effect on the pain receptors. So you then feel you either need to take more of it or take it more frequently. And that's how the addiction starts. And there are so many people that started with a sports injury or maybe an auto accident or something along those lines, and they were given Percocet, Darvocet, Tylenol number 3 with codeine, anything that had the opioids in it, and less than a week they really developed an addiction. And then it comes to the point where your physician will not give you more prescriptions, so then they start going to the emergency rooms trying to get them, and then they find out that, at least in the past, heroin was a lot less expensive than trying to buy the medications. So many people switch to heroin as the drug of choice. And of course, heroin is not controlled by the Federal Drug Administration as far as its contents, as are prescription medications. So it's very easy to wind up with heroin that was more potent than the last one that you took. I mean, there's no regulations as far as the active ingredient in street drugs. So it's very, very easy to wind up taking more than what you might have taken the last time. Because you don't really know the total chemical consistency of the drug that you're taking. This is just going to be a little bit of pathophysiology, okay? I'm trying to make it pretty simple here. Opioids bind to the receptors that are in the central nervous system and also the peripheral nervous system, which central nervous system is your brain, your spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system is everything else in your body: hands, arms, legs, trunk, back, all that stuff. When the opioids bind to the receptors, what opioids were initially created for were to either control pain, control a cough, or control diarrhea. Believe it or not, the drug that we give, Lamodal, is an opioid, and that stops diarrhea. And it also can cause lightheadedness and a euphoric sensation from the drug. So that was the initial attempt of opioids. Of course, now, in this day, it has totally changed. What happens is action on those receptors induces intense euphoria, and that causes the individual to continue using with the intention of always recreating that very first high or that very first incident of euphoria. Most of those who misuse opioids do it for pain relief, or at least that's how it started. And also, when you're taking these meds, it seems like the pain gets more intense for some reason, and that's how the opioids happen to affect the nerves that control pain. And they have actually found that opioids are not a good solution to chronic pain. Acute pain, yes. Chronic, it's not such a good idea. Unless, of course, it's someone that has cancer, and we know that they're sort of in the last phases of life, and then we're going to want to make them comfortable. But someone that's not in that situation, opioids are definitely not the first choice to try to control pain. There's other meds you can use. There's other things you can do: heat, ice, exercise, massage therapy, electrical stimulation. I mean, there's all kinds of other things that you can use for pain control that they do work, and they work very well. I know a physician that used to, many times when patients came in with back issues, would refer them to a massage therapist because he found out that the massage therapist helped tremendously with the pain control for patients that he was aware of, and so then he started doing that. So you don't always necessarily need to have a medication to put in your body to relieve the pain. I'm not saying it's not necessary initially after an acute situation like a surgical procedure or a severe injury. It is necessary because you want to get the person up and moving, because it's more detrimental to you to not move and stay still because you're experiencing pain than to give the medication to lessen the pain so you can get up and move around. And that's why, I don't know if any of you have experienced situations with family members and surgical procedures. They get you up walking the same day, pretty much. Even open heart surgery, they get you up the same day and they have you walking around. With opioids, you don't want to stop them. I mean, if somebody tries to stop them on their own, they're probably going to have withdrawal symptoms, and they're not a very comfortable situation. One, especially if it's opioids that you've taken because of pain control, the pain can become worse than what it initially was. And then you can also have other physiological symptoms like hot or cold situations, sweats, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, watery eyes, inability to sleep, anxiety. Because you're not getting that medication, your anxiety level's going to go way up, and it depends on how you can tolerate and deal with that as far as getting yourself off when you're going through the withdrawal. Your heart rate can go really fast. You get really dehydrated, mainly because your heart rate's going so fast and you're really super anxious, and that all takes a toll on the body. So it's not really a good idea if you do have an opioid addiction to try to go through withdrawal on your own unless you taper what you're taking. And that is a safe way to do it, and that's what the physician would do. Plus, he may give you some other things to minimize the symptoms that you're having from withdrawal. And two that I know of are the methadone and the Suboxone, which are the drugs that are given if you have an opioid addiction. I just want to give some warning signs of addiction. An individual can ignore commitments or responsibilities. They may develop problems at work, home, or school. They have unexplained absences. They appear to have a new set of friends, especially like if this is one of your children. As a teenager, you can definitely be suspicious if that happens in a very quick situation. Also, they have a considerable monetary fluctuation. In other words, they have more cash on them than they've had in the past. Also, they have a change in their sleep pattern. They have lapses in concentration and memory. They can be oddly secretive about parts of their personal life. They withdraw from normal social events. They have an unusual lack of motivation, something they were very interested in doing before. They absolutely don't even want to deal with. And weight loss or changes in your physical appearance can also be indicative of an addiction. I just want to mention a little bit, because in some of the stuff that I was reading, they say there is what they call an addictive personality. So not everybody is going to become addicted to something. There is research, as I mentioned, that shows that there's a genetic connection, whether it be a parent, brother, sister, something like that. But then what comes into play is the way a child develops is not only affected by genetics, but also their environment. So is the environment, because their dad was an alcoholic, the reason why they're more prone to it? Or is there a genetic connection? Because they have, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this, they have certain symptoms of an addictive personality that would then cause them to want to seek relief of some of the symptoms that they're having, and they would then take the drugs or alcohol or do the behavior. Okay, so an addictive personality is more likely to become addicted to something. They can include someone becoming extremely passionate about something and developing an obsession or a fixation. The underlying factors for getting carried away and overindulging, say, in video games, food, sex, sugar, cigarettes, drugs, alcohol, many of those stem from usually hidden anxiety, depression, and poor impulse control. Impulse control is a big thing when it comes to addiction. It's also a big thing when it comes to rehab from addiction, because the impulse control is what that individual controls themselves. And it's very hard sometimes when an addict develops a lot of the physiological symptoms from withdrawal, and then the impulse to then take the drug is easy for them to just continue taking the drug to relieve the feelings that they're having without having that in their bodies. Some indications of an addictive personality include comfort or binge eating. I'm not going to say because you like to eat a lot or you binge eat that you're going to become an addict, but you're going to find things on here that normal people have. But these are also indications that you may have an addictive personality, which then could lead to an addiction. The use of alcohol every time you socialize or to relax. And I find this interesting because my grandkids do this all the time, checking your phone or social media constantly. And that is an addiction kids are having. Actually, that's kind of a new thing. I'm not going to talk much about it, but it's definitely for real. Impulse buying or excessive shopping. Never was one of my problems because I hate to shop. Gambling, just obsessing over certain things. Excessive risk-taking. Somebody that has absolutely no fear to do anything. Need drugs to help them cope with situations, whether it be a depression, loss of a family member, or an issue that's going on in the family, or a circumstance that the individual is experiencing. An individual who never feels satisfied and they need more of a particular feeling. An inability to stop using the harmful chemicals, and an inability to curtail other harmful activities. So those are more common indications. That doesn't mean you're going to become an addict if you have any of those traits. Just going to list substance of abuse and things that I researched, and then I'm only going to focus more on drugs. The 6 main categories are alcohol, benzodiazepines, illicit drugs, opiates, sleeping pills, and stimulants. Since I'm talking about I'm just going to talk about drugs in general for just a short time. Benzodiazepines. They are highly addictive. They're used for panic attacks, anxiety, and many physicians, especially Xanax, if anybody's heard that, more than 44 million prescriptions have been written yearly. This is the most prescribed medication in the United States at this point in time, and it is highly addictive. Some of the others include Ativan, Halcyon, they use that for sleep usually, Klonopin, and Valium. Valium was an issue back in the 60s, 50s, and 60s because the docs used to give them to mostly women because of anxiety, whatever that might be, and Valium did become a big problem with addiction. Most physicians don't order that anymore, but I can say that we still would use it in the emergency room if somebody came in with a seizure, because that's what we mainly would use it for now, would be for seizures. Opioids. There's lots of them. Codeine, Demerol, Dilaudid, fentanyl, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about fentanyl, hydrocodone, methadone, morphine, oxycodone, propoxyphene. Does anybody know what that is? They don't prescribe this anymore. Darvocets. They found that there was just way too many complications with it, so the FDA banned its production in 2010. So I doubt that you'll find it around unless it's illegally produced. And Tramadol. Tramadol is a new drug, and it's kind of interesting. It affects the brain the same way opioids do, but it doesn't necessarily give you the euphoria that the opioids do. And initially, we thought, oh, great, this is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug that's also going to help with good pain control. But as time went on, they found out that it truly does affect the brain the exact same way the opiates do. So an addiction can occur from it. Some other meds that would be considered would be sleeping pills. Ambien, Sonata, Lunesta. You hear that advertised on the radio a lot, on TV a lot. At least I have lately. Mainly with sleeping pills, the problem is either they take more than they're prescribed or they mix it with other things, especially alcohol. Or maybe a pain med, an opioid, they mix it. And so that the mixtures can cause issues. Alone, they're pretty effective as far as helping someone try to sleep if they have issues with not being able to sleep. But you can also develop a tolerance to these medications too, where it might take more and more and more to help you fall asleep. Stimulants. Also amphetamines, speed. That was when I was a teenager, we always called speed. One of the biggest drugs right now is Adderall. A lot of kids are put on this drug for ADHD, and it is highly abused. It also is made illicitly, sometimes laced with fentanyl. So I guess the bottom line as far as medications go, don't ever buy them online unless it's a notable pharmacy like CVS, or if you order through online for CVS, Walgreens, any one of those. And don't buy it on the street, definitely, because it's not going to be made the way the FDA required it to be made as far as its chemical composition. Other stimulants like antidepressants, they don't usually produce a high, but they don't produce a high or cause intense cravings. And many times they can take up to a month for the individual to see any results. Prozac, I'm drawing a blank now. Wellbutrin. They're different antidepressants. They work differently on the body, but they can be abused. We don't see a lot of overdoses with these in the emergency room, but they definitely have the potential for abuse. Diet pills, Dexedrine, you can buy over the counter. You can buy those little shot things in most convenience stores that have caffeine and maybe some Dexedrine in it that you can get over the counter. Ritalin, another thing that they've used for young children for attention deficit disorder. Those that don't have attention deficit disorder, Ritalin works the exact opposite on their body. So if you have attention deficit, it helps calm the child down. But someone who does not have that, it gives you a high. It gives you a euphoric feeling. You can feel really focused. You can feel like you can get a lot of stuff done. And you feel really good when you're on it. So you will find a lot of adults that don't have attention deficit disorder using it, plus it also can be abused and sold on the street. Anabolic steroids, nobody probably ever thought about them, but they can become addictive too. And they're also not legal at this point anyway. Some illicit drugs, okay, cocaine, crack cocaine. Cocaine is usually snorted, crack cocaine is usually inhaled or shot up. You can do it either way. Ecstasy. Ecstasy is consumed mostly by younger people at parties and raves. That's kind of where you see the most of it. It also has a hallucinogenic effect. Heroin, which was a really big thing probably 10 years ago. Now it's the fentanyl that we're seeing in the emergency rooms. And also inhalants, like over-the-counter stuff. I worked in an emergency room in Michigan years ago. We had a guy that used to snort white out. And he would come in out of his mind with white all over his face, around his nose, and overdosed. He overdosed himself. Things like nail polish remover, gas, gasoline, people inhale that, paint thinner, lighter fluid, cleaning products, a lot of those things. And the problem with them is they're very destructive to our body because they weren't intended to be put in the human body. And so you can wind up with a lot of physiological issues from them, whether it be lung, if you're inhaling, muscular, nervous system, skin, aging process. A lot of those things make you age very, very quickly. Ketamine is another one. It is illicit, but it's also not. It's on the street. It's an animal anesthesia. But I have used it in the emergency room many times for children who come in that might have some kind of a fracture or dislocation, and that needs to be done and put back where it should be, and you need to sedate the individual. So we do use ketamine in the hospital, but usually just for those situations. It is extremely addictive. It doesn't take very long, 1 or 2 uses of it, and you can develop an addiction. It's also one of the drugs that's used as a date rape drug because it has no taste and it has no smell. And you can put it in a drink and nobody knows. Marijuana, depends on the state you live in, whether it's legal for medicinal use and or recreational. Pennsylvania currently is medicinal, and there are only certain physicians that can order it, and there's only certain places that you can purchase it with your prescription. There's also a thing out there called synthetic marijuana. It's also known as spice or K2. It's a manufactured substance, but it contains the THC that is in marijuana. And because it can be purchased legally, many think it's a safer alternative to marijuana, but it is not. It's dangerously addictive, more so than marijuana even. And it can produce a lot of psychoactive effects that can be caused also by the marijuana. LSD is another one that's out there as a hallucinogenic. That was really popular in the 60s and 70s. I don't think it's so much now as it once was. Fentanyl, the one I want to kind of focus in on. There's fentanyl that's made by pharmaceutical companies, follows specific regulations as far as the amounts of the active chemicals that are in it. There's also fentanyl analogs, and these are things that are produced illicitly. There's no control over what's in it or how much of it, of the active ingredient is in it. And the overdose deaths are soaring right now from it. Many people maybe they're just trying something for the first time, and I always fear this with my grandkids. Oh, this will make you feel good. It's not going to hurt you. Go ahead and try it once. And it's got the fentanyl, and it kills them. There are so many people that are dying. I call it poisoning, fentanyl poisoning, because it's not so much they're overdosing, they're just ingesting it, and it kills them from it. And it's just so important that parents are very diligent about this. And I know that like an EMS person, when they come upon the scene of someone that possibly had a fentanyl overdose, they wear hazmat suits. Think of amount of powder the size of a tiny little pinhead. That's all you need to get on your skin to absorb into your body, and if that happens to a child, it can kill them. The prescription fentanyl comes in patches. People use it for pain control, usually cancer patients. It also comes in, well, I know you can give it IV because it's been used in surgical procedures also, or pain control, just for acute pain. But fentanyl is 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine, so it doesn't take a whole lot to cause a lot of issues. It also comes in the form of a lollipop or a nasal spray. Yeah, it's very deceiving. And I don't know if anybody's noticed in the news now that they're making the color fentanyl tablets that look like kids' candy, and they're putting them in Nerds candy packages or Skittles, yes, Skittles, and the packages look legit, let alone the medication looking legit. So you really have to be careful. I know there's a big thing about that going around with Halloween, so if you've got kids or grandkids that are doing trick-or-treating, just be real diligent when you're looking at it. Fentanyl analogs, there's so many of them, but this one name kind of made me chuckle because it's called red rum. Spell it backwards. Murder. Yeah. And that's one of the street names. A couple other are like Perco Pops, White Heroin, Dance Fever, Jackpot, Tango and Cash, Goodfella. Those are the street names for the fentanyl analogs that are being made illicitly. The other thing, too, I wanted to mention with the fentanyl patches that are prescription, if a young child happens to get that on their skin, it can kill them because it's a large dose and too much for his body size or her body size. So you have to be really careful with that also. The other issue there is with fentanyl is disposing of it. Don't flush it down the toilet because they're finding it's contaminating or can possibly contaminate water sources. How, I don't know that your sewage gets recycled as your city water. I don't quite understand that, but I guess it can be absorbed into the ground and maybe affect wells, is what I was thinking. And there's a new drug that is a fentanyl analog, and it's just been mentioned recently as far as, let me think, this article was, I think, August. And it's called parafluorofentanyl. And from May 1st, 2021 to April 30th, 2022, so that's a whole year, there have been 108,174 overdose deaths in the United States. Since 1999, 932,000 people in the United States have died from a drug overdose. That's almost 1 million people. Drug overdose rates are higher in 2020. The statistics I have only go up to 2020 because they're still putting 21s together, and then, of course, 22. So they're usually a few years behind in the current day. So the most recent is 2020. The OD rates in 2020 for all groups of people, all races, was much higher than 2019 in those that are 15 years old and older. Drug overdose deaths, including all the drugs, have increased 31% from 2019 to 2020. Age 35 to 45 is the age group that has the highest death rates, and they have increased 33% from 2019 to 2020. 65 years old and older are the age group with the lowest deaths, but they have also increased from 2019 to 2020. The age group between 45 and 54, they've increased 27% from 19 to 20. And the age of 15 to 24, they're the largest percentage increase, but they're the second lowest rate. So they've increased 49%, but their rates, and this is per 100,000 people, were 11.2 in 2019 and 16.2 in 2020. But they've had the biggest increase. And that's just because of all the stuff that's available for kids to get. So that's why it's really important to be very diligent with the minors that still live with us. 75% of drug overdose in 20 involved opioids. And this is an increase from 2018 because in 2018 it was 70% of all deaths were from opioids. Synthetic opioids, including the fentanyl, they have increased 57% from 2019 to 2020. That's just heart-wrenching in my mind when you think about it, because fentanyl kills so many. Cocaine, it's only been up 22%, not only, it's up 22%. And ironically, heroin overdoses have gone down in the most recent years, but fentanyl has taken over. Just think about this. Over 20 million Americans aged 12 or older have an addiction, and that's not including tobacco. And 100 people a day die from overdoses. And this has tripled just in the last 5 years. They talked about Narcan, naloxone. I'll just talk about that quickly. Narcan is a very short, they call it a half-life, or how long it works in your body. And she mentioned 20 minutes to 90 minutes. The problem with that is, especially working in the emergency room, most opioids stay in the body much longer. Methadone could be 8 hours. I mean, it's a very long-acting medication. The problem with it is most overdoses due to opioids require multiple doses of naloxone or Narcan. Working in the emergency room, the one thing that we had to worry about is if somebody came in that was an opioid overdose and we gave Narcan, they basically wake up swinging because they're really, really angry that you just ruined their high. The problem is Narcan doesn't last very long. Situation that did happen, girl came in with overdose. She was given Narcan, she was awake. Mom and dad were happy. She was taken care of in the emergency room. They wanted to take her home. And we explained to her, no, because whatever it was that she took will be in her system a number of hours. The Narcan is only an hour and a half, max. So you're going to wind up back here within an hour or two with her back with overdose symptoms again. Nope, they were not convinced, and they took her home. Hour and a half later, she was brought back in full arrest, and she didn't make it. Narcan is a medication that is easy to give, as they showed. You can squirt it in the nose. I usually do IV. It's very readily available, and it's good, but I have a problem with that because I think if Narcan's going to be available, then insulin should be free too, because Narcan's free. Most of the police departments carry it. Of course, EMS carries it. There might be some facilities, rehab centers that might carry it. I'm not quite sure about that. It works very, very well, but it takes more than one dose. We've had to admit patients on drips to the ICU because of whatever they took, so that they didn't go back into the overdose situation where they stop breathing. And that's usually what happens with opioids, it stops your breathing. 51 opioid prescriptions are written for every 100 Americans. Yeah, that's half the population.